Hi, Chandra.
Hi, everyone.
How's it going?
Very well, thank you. How are you all?
We just got done with lunch. We're in a good mood. The morning's been awesome. We're having a great time.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and we're really excited for your presentation.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, this is great.
Is tomorrow your first day at work at your new job?
Yes, it is.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Does that mean your bio has changed? Are you still the CEO of Resolve?
Yes, as of today. Yes.
Okay, then we'll just do it as of today. I'm very excited for you.
Well, and Lolani, if you can tilt your camera up a little bit.
Oh yeah, here we go.
Cuts you off at your eyeballs.
Okay, Chandra Farley is an activist at heart and credits her parents with instilling a sense of duty always to do what she can to advance justice and fairness. With a passion for elevating the connection between environmental justice, strong communities, and our daily lives, Chandra continues to build upon a career foundation in the design and construction industry. Currently, Chandra serves as the CEO of Resolve, an energy justice consulting practice with a mission to increase the impact of energy and utility initiatives by centering equity. Chandra also founded the Good Energy Project with a vision to connect the transformational power of Black women to the movement for equitable, clean energy. Chandra also recently completed a historic run for the Georgia Public Service Commission. Woo, Chandra, I'm really excited to have you here, ready for your presentation. And thank you for coming today.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to take a second to get to the right screen. I have a couple open, so that always throws me off once I hit present. But I was glad to be invited and am excited to be in conversation with this group today. And I think that, thank you for reading some of my bio. I will definitely probably still have a little bit of that as we go forward. And I definitely wanted to leave plenty of time for dialogue. I know you've had a lot of representation from across the nation, which is exciting. And I definitely always lean into what's happening down here in the South, what's happening down here in Georgia. My upbringing here has definitely always and continues to always inform my perspective and where I'm coming from. So when we were talking about, thanks, so much to Sean and the team for inviting me. We were talking about what should I talk about today, and we really talked about having a conversation around advancing equity in utility regulation, and that is definitely where I want to start, and also connected to advancing equity in utility regulation for me, as you just saw on my first slide, and I'll pull that back up once we go through the intro, is really a means for energy justice. Again, my grounding and my background has been around social justice, civil rights, and I do, as I get started, do want to acknowledge, again, where I am. I am based in the ancestral lands of the Muskogee Creek Nation, which is now known as Atlanta, Georgia. I grew up in Tennessee, which is largely were the ancestral lands of Cherokee Nation in Middle Tennessee, where I grew up. And I also just want to acknowledge and honor those who were enslaved and forcibly brought to these lands. And that is, again, just really couched in me being an activist at heart. And yes, in that intro, my parents really did instill in me this sense of duty, maybe unintentionally, but actually intentionally. I was raised by my grandparents in a town called Gallatin, Tennessee. It's about 40 minutes north of Nashville, but it's actually closer to Kentucky than it is to Nashville. But being raised by Black people in the South, grandparents of the age that they remember not being able to vote. They went to segregated schools. And those schools were later my elementary schools. And our family business growing up was a restaurant. And all throughout my life, even after schools were integrated into the high school and that I ultimately went to, my grandparents, our church community, our family and extended family, they still had reunions for Union High School, which was their high school. And the walls of our restaurant were covered with these like huge, like 3 foot by 4 foot senior class pictures, just like lined all the walls. And so I grew up with this deep sense of responsibility, this deep sense of being rooted in and connected to the history of the South and the legacy of civil rights. On top of that, it was the country. You know, it was a small town. So, you know, I grew up, my next door neighbor and I would travel, you know, walk around in the summer and pick up aluminum cans, and we could take them down to the dump that was in our neighborhood and recycle them for candy money. My great grandparents had a garden, and depending on what season it was, well, whatever was growing in the garden would often show up on the menu of the restaurant. My first job when I was like 9 or 10 was scraping off the food into, from leftover food from the tables into the big slop buckets that cousins and extended family would come and get, pick it up, take it up to their farms, feed it to the pigs. So, you know, these things were not called farm to table or composting or sustainability. Like, I didn't have the language for that then. And so that natural environment, social justice, civil rights, leaning into the science. One of my first projects in junior high, middle school was about the greenhouse gas effect. My daddy helped me build a shoebox and fashion some saran wrap, into a greenhouse. And I actually didn't know until maybe just a couple of years ago that the reason we were focused on that at that particular time in school was because of the Kyoto Protocol, which we've just, the anniversary was last year. We've seen that come back in the news this year recently, in the last couple of weeks around the Kigali Amendment. So all of these things, science, social justice, nature, really has informed my perspective on built and natural environments, and particularly the intersection with energy. It was interesting to me when I joined Southface Energy Institute in 2009, and that was at the height of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And so Southface, who is a nonprofit focused on sustainable homes, workplaces, and communities, a real anchor for Georgia and the South, we were, training, doing weatherization training, doing the trainings for the crews who were then going out to really level up on the weatherization program here. We built a training center. So all of these things were happening. And as always, I still always have this this grounding in civil rights and social justice. So that led me to seek out an opportunity to join the EPA's Environmental Justice Academy that was created by a group of Black women in the Region 4 office of EPA here in Georgia, and I was able to join that class. So that really started to give me the basis to connect energy, efficiency, buildings to environmental justice, right? My background's architecture and design. I did a lot of volunteering with Architecture for Humanity. But still language that we use now around energy justice, energy equity. I didn't have that language then, although I was running and expanding programs that we called at the time Grants to Green, but nonprofit energy and water efficiency programs where we, Southface, was funded so our engineers could go out and do energy assessments for all of these nonprofit facilities, come up with a project list, and then we had a foundation partner who was separately funding to provide 50% of the cost to these nonprofits to make these upgrades. Amazing, right? I mean, we have over, at this point in the early days, it was a Georgia, larger metro Atlanta focused program. Part of my role was to expand that program from single buildings to campuses. So not just universities, but nonprofits that had more than one building on their footprint. And then also a national expansion. So I worked with Boys and Girls Clubs of America, Feeding America and their food bank network, and Salvation Army. And just going through that process and learning about just the barriers around education and awareness when you are coming to nonprofits who are always getting hit with offers for this and that, and you finally convince them, the people that you're working with, who might be a program director who drives the bus, coaches the basketball team, manages the staff, what it means to look at the utility bill and show them, hey, when we change out your lighting to LED, when we optimize your HVAC system, when we put aerators, on your faucets, or change out your toilets to, pint flush, or, whatever we were doing at that time. And they see, because we were helping with them with the upfront cost, and they see a reduction of $1,000 a month on their utility bill for their club or their food bank. And that turns into $9,000, $10,000, $12,000 a year. Well, those are hundreds of additional kids they could serve in their programs. Those were additional art teachers they could hire in the summer. For 3 food banks in Alabama, who collectively saved about $70,000 over the first couple of years. That was an additional almost 300,000 additional meals they could serve to needy families. And again, something I didn't have the language for, I didn't refer to that as energy equity, but that is exactly what it was, right? Our nonprofits, our shelters, our recreation centers, our clubs are our community anchors. And while I worked with really passionate people, and we always wanted to go further and do education, which we were able to do sometimes with some of the kids, and doing programs, and then they would teach their parents, just like I did, coming home talking about recycling, even though these were things that my grandparents already knew about. These were things that my aunts and uncles already knew about. Black people, people of color, rural folks, people, these are people who innovated what we now call sustainability, innovated what we call conservation out of the ability to survive, right? And not struggle. Shut that door. You're letting my air out. Turn the lights off before you leave that room. Don't leave that water running. I'm going to age myself. My daddy used to get on to me for talking long distance. But all of those things, are sustainability. All of those things are, climate resilience now, those decarbonization. And so my passion really around intersecting in these intersections is that a lot of the barriers that we face to public participation, adoption around education and awareness, I think is a lot of times because these things have been repackaged and sold back to the very communities who had to depend on them. So I loved the buildings, but I really got to a point where I was ready to work more with the people that the buildings shelter and the communities that the buildings serve. So by sharing my background, I just hope that you can see how my life has been shaped. This is not advancing, so we'll just do it this way. And yeah,
Trying to share your slides.
It was just my laptop was not advancing, but
Oh, no worries then.
yeah, I'll just share it on the regular way where y'all can see all the slides coming up. So people, right? People, communities. This has shaped everything around my work. And I'll just go back to that since it won't advance, probably because I have too many screens open. But now when we talk about, again, energy justice, energy equity, decarbonization, climate resilience, the worst impacts of climate change are a result of capitalism, systemic racism, and a lack of decision makers who come from the communities that suffer the most from our changing climate. So the community-based solutions that I advocate for and that we need must come from the people. And for that to happen, we have to build people power. We have to make sure that the people with the lived experience are the people leading development of the solutions and directing the investment in those solutions. Who do you want to ask about how to solve a problem? The people closest to a problem. So how do we do that? How do we increase this leadership, from people with the lived experience? Well, we've got to get more people from these impacted communities, our neighbors, in seats of decision making. In academia, corporations, local government, and all levels of government, including those that regulate policy for energy. This is critically important because these bodies, these regulatory bodies, we call it the Public Service Commission. In Georgia, most places in the South, others call it public utility commissions. This is critically important because those who regulate energy decide whether it comes from clean sources like solar and wind, or dirty sources like the fossil fuels that we know disproportionately impact Black communities of color, with harmful emissions. And energy regulators also decide how much we pay for energy. So this is another critical intervention if community-based solutions that bring in all residents, that bring in our community-based institutions, bring in our neighborhood anchors, that can help us address climate change, can have the positive impact that the dreaming around the solutions is intended to have. Because just because it's clean, just because it's renewable, does not mean it's just. That does not happen on its own. Right now in Georgia, our investor-owned utility, Georgia Power, is in front of the Public Service Commission defending their request for a 12% increase in rates. This is on top of a similarly sized rate increase that is still being implemented in its third year as this new case is coming up. This amount could amount to about $14 to $16 a month over the next 3 years. And sometimes that doesn't sound like a lot, but we know there are families, we know there are seniors, we know there are essential workers and small businesses that are and will be even more squeezed by these increases, on top of the inflation, on top of fossil gas volatility. Also, this increase is only one of 4 that the utility will be seeking over the next 3 years. So when we combine this, we're looking at Georgia Power willing to or advocating to levy a potential electric bill increase of approximately 45% over the next 4-ish years. It's also worth noting that the Georgia Public Service Commission actually barred in-person public comments from the integrated resource plan that just finalized in July. Much outcry about this. Give all the advocates and our community-based organizations and residents for speaking up to make sure that they reinstituted that process for our rate case, which kicked off yesterday. 3 days of hearings this month. We'll have another few days of hearings next month before that decision is final in December. But this is a public agency paid for with public dollars, governed by publicly elected officials with the 2nd or 3rd highest salary in the state, saying that they don't have time to hear input from the very public that their decisions immediately impact, right? Our utility commissions are making decisions that have immediate impact on people, because when the commission makes this decision in December, people will see this on their bills in January, right? On top of those increases I just talked about from the last 3 years. So I ran for Georgia Public Service Commission this year, as we talked about, because if we're going to change systems, we need to change the decision makers. And my entire platform for the PSC was based on this. We need commissioners who understand that they are not subsidiaries of the utilities that they are supposed to regulate. So increasing access to these types of proceedings was the basis of most of my work over the last few years. The coalitions and partnerships that I've built, helped to build and participated in locally, regionally, and nationally, we share best practices, strategies, and tactics on the very difficult task of breaking down the barriers to these regulatory processes. In closing, because I want to be able to leave time for some questions, but I was a co-author for the Advancing Equity and Utility Regulation paper for Lawrence Berkeley National Lab as a part of their electricity future of utility regulation series. And that brought together 4 perspectives on advancing equity in electric utility regulation. I was co-authors with representatives from consumer organizations and a leading utility in an area of this focus. So along with John Howitt from National Consumer Law Center, Needy Takar from Portland General Electric, Howard Crystal from Center for Biological Diversity, and Jean Sue from Center for Biological Diversity, we provided recommendations related to regulatory issues. And let's go ahead and share this outline of recommendations here in closing. But at the end of the day, these decisions are about people. Equity is about people. Justice is about people. Decarbonization is about people. Net zero is about people, and we cannot forget that. So these are some of the top recommendations that were presented in that Advancing Equity and Utility Regulation series. We also and looking at equity and utility regulation as a vehicle for energy justice. And I reference often the work of the Institute for Energy Justice that was co-founded by Shalonda Baker, who is now at DOE, leading Justice 40, leading these initiatives. So the structural change, it is happening, and we just have to we just have to keep going. But I will stop there, and would love to take questions or dive in on anything else that I put forward today.
Ooh, good job. That was great.
That was amazing. You were so well spoken.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, your stories are amazing. Your insights are amazing. And so my question for you was, what happens next? Because you're changing jobs. And I don't know if you're allowed to really express direction as opposed to take it from the mayor, or I'm just curious, what are you comfortable sharing about your next step tomorrow when you join the City of Atlanta as the Director of Sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So Chief Sustainability Officer for City of Atlanta. I'm really excited about it. One, that position's been vacant for a while. I think a lot of us know who have worked with local government. We staff local government, right? I mean, my 7-8 years at South Phase, my almost 4 years at Partnership for Southern Equity, we were the technical assistance people for a lot of the work that we did in partnership with the Mayor's Office of Resilience. So I am excited about the community of people that are coming along with me in this role, because this is our work. This, collectively, this is work that we have built over a number of years. This is work that has persevered over the course of multiple administrations, in spite of varying priorities from a mayor. We know how difficult that can be. So I am really excited about our current mayor, Andre Dickens. He's a housing guy. His thing, housing affordability, is a huge problem in Atlanta, across the nation. But he's been a long time advocate for and keeps equity at the center of all of his platforms and initiatives, and continues to lift that up. He speaks a lot about sustainability. He understands it. So I am encouraged by that. This position is also now back on the mayor's cabinet, which is a critical opportunity to make sure that the sustainability office have direct dialogue with all of the other departments who do sustainability work, right? I mean, the work of sustainability is not just in the Office of Sustainability. It's transportation, it's public works, solid waste, housing, all of those things. So there are a lot of great people in the city. I'm excited about working with them, and just being able to pick up the torch from the chief sustainability officers and chief resilience officers that came before me. One former, the first actually that the City of Atlanta had, just texted me a minute ago. So we're all in conversation and collaboration, because we know this is generational work, right? I mean, we're talking about lifetime, changes. The pace of local government can be frustrating, but we also know the pace of this work is long term. And so I'm excited to be able to help drive that.
Thank you. So there's a bunch of good questions. Ian Tran asked, can you share some favorite examples about how you level set a bias towards action prioritizing the marginalized communities? Favorite examples of how you level set to make it that.
It's hard. It's difficult. I will say, and when I was at Partnership for Southern Equity, the work that we did during the last during our last regulatory year. So here in Georgia, that's every 3 years. We have the IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan, the first half of the year, followed by the rate case. And our organizers, one of our lead organizers, across the state, bringing residents from as far away as Savannah. So Georgia's a big state. So city of Atlanta is the capital. Savannah, the original capital, is 4 hours away. Valdosta, which is down on the Florida, border, even a little bit further. And so it was a huge lift to raise money for, host town halls around the state, convince people and manage scheduling in a way that allowed them to not miss work or help them, get approval to miss work, because we know these procedures, these processes and proceedings, they start at 9 a.m. Everybody whose voice that you need to be involved in these proceedings doesn't work in the space, right? But we persevered. The rate case process is a 4-ish month long process, and we had multiple demonstrations. We had probably over 200 residents over the course of that come spend the night in Atlanta. They would leave after work from Savannah, get here late at night, wake up in the morning, do their public comment, and then, we'd had gotten funding to help with vans and gas and all of that. That was huge. And I can see that now. My Public Service Commission Google alerts has been blowing up in a way about the rate case that we didn't see 3 years ago, and certainly was non-existent 6 years ago, for sure. So that is a key. And so, some of the tactics and strategies change. But that power building is about a continuum of engagement. So it wasn't like we weren't just talking to people over the last 3 years. And it also wasn't that we just didn't go to those people and communities for the first time because it was the IRP. These were people that our organizers had long-term relationships with. These were people that had been a part of our Just Energy Academy, which is a community leadership development program specifically focused on educating community members around Energy Policy 101, Environmental Justice 101, Utility Regulation 101. So I just think it's important to say, this was something that I can point to, but that building work, that relationship building work happened way before that regulatory year, and continued in the off season, which is why we are seeing even more people get involved and speak about it this year.
Thank you for that. There's so many more questions, but we have to transition to our next speaker. So thank you, Chandra.
For sure. Thank you so much. I know it's been, a lot of information today, and I'm wishing you all the best tomorrow. People can reach me on LinkedIn. That's I'm pretty, responsive there. So best wishes with the rest. Thank you for allowing me to take part.
Thank you. Yeah, head on over to the chat and say hi to people there.
Okay, I will.